Well, hello again. So where did Matt Sheehan go? There's a question. I have actually spent a little bit of time away from the geospatial world, thinking about it, focusing on it, just taking a little hiatus, which is always good, I think. But we're back. We have a new background, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we're going to take this Geospatial-Next journey to. So onwards and upwards. Well, yes, indeed, it was a brief hiatus. Brief being the word I underline. So what have I been doing? Actually, I've had a rather fun summer. I've had some of that. I've been and got warm at places like that. Places like that too. I've met new friends. And probably the highlight of the last 3 months has been seeing a grizzly bear in the wild, and there he is crossing the road. He looks like he's a long way away, but actually he was a lot closer to me than that picture would suggest, and it was well, one of the highlights of the year. That and seeing a tarantula spider last week when I was running. So it's been a very fun time, but it's given me a chance to kind of reflect on this wonderful geospatial world that we all inhabit. And I've thought about where we next take these talks and some of the stuff that I've been doing over the last few years. So let's dive in a bit to that. Danger Will Robinson, terminology. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember Star Trek, but the Star Trek in the 60s and 70s was hilarious, and there was a particularly good character in that called Dr. Smith. But anyway, terminology. Terminology is always a tricky place to, particularly in our geospatial world, but I thought it good to step back for a minute and just define geospatial. Geospatial means place on Earth, simple as that. And that's really the focus of what all of the talks that I've been doing over the last few years are on. It's really on the data and the technology which describes, defines, helps people understand a place or places on Earth. So it's really an umbrella term. And again, like I've just said, I see it as location-centric data and technology. We're a little fixated on that. We'll step away from that a little bit as we move forward, and I'll explain more in this talk. So, a Geospatial-Next brief refresher. You've heard me gab on about this over the time, but my world and most of our worlds began with GIS. So I'll generalize about GIS. GIS was two-dimensional expert-only map-making technology. I think that's fair. Some people might pick me up and not agree with that, but that's always been my perspective for chunks of my career as I've worked with that technology. And I've worked through the desktop world to the web world to the mobile world. So it's evolved, but primarily that's what it's been, its history. I'm going to move out of the way. I would say we're now in a world where GIS is expanding, the offering expanding, the original technology stack and capabilities have been extended. But GIS isn't the only game in town. I think it's fair to say there are other technologies now which are ingesting, leveraging location-based data and providing analytics to that. And that's really part of this geospatial conversation. So back in the day, it was GIS. Now it's GIS and a wider mix of technologies. So that's kind of really the core of Geospatial-Next is that expanding world. So a critical part of that expanding world, which again I've highlighted in previous talks, is the fact that we've really seen an expansion in remote sensing. And frankly, I don't come from remote sensing, but I understand a lot more about that world of remote sensing than I did. I always imagined it was imagery-based technology, but really it's about leveraging these new sensors where you're not actually touching the assets or things that you're collecting data on. We're using sensors, and there are a multitude of different sensors now, which are at different levels. They're in orbit, they're on planes or on drones or on the ground, but we're now collecting tons of data. That really all sits under remote sensing. LiDAR, which we'll talk quite a lot about, sits under that sort of under that world, and it's really about the collection, processing and analysis of that data. And more often than not, we're talking about two-dimensional and three-dimensional data, and it's provided in various forms to various folks. So that's the remote sensing world. And again, there's my explanation of it. It's really, that revolution is really a huge remote sensing revolution. Now we have a data tsunami. It represents massive opportunities and significant challenges. And again, that's sort of the heart of what I believe the Geospatial-Next conversation is to actually kind of explore what that means to the wider world of geospatial. And then we've got this whole world of automation, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And there's massive amounts of hype attached to this. It's this great promise of the future. The reality is quite different to to what we've been presented, I believe, and have seen. So, AI machine learning, massive promise for the future, but it's quite complex and it requires considerable understanding and expertise, and it's a long journey to get there. So I believe that we're at a very sort of early stage of artificial intelligence and machine learning, but it's has huge potential for the future. Okay, so I sense that we're in an industry in flux, and it's not just our industry, but it's the wider world of technology. We're seeing massive advance in technology. We're part of that. We're in that flow, so to speak, of these advances in technology. But let's just talk specifically about geospatial. I would say, it's generally agreed that historically we've been very data and technology focused. That's been sort of we love talking about all of the background stuff, and we're very sort of have been very focused there. In general terms, I'm not just talking about GIS. I'm talking about remote sensing and other sort of disciplines within the sort of under the geospatial umbrella term. It's generally been experts only technology. I mean, GIS, again, arguably, it remains somewhat expert only, but again, I think we've seen a change in GIS where now we've got these sort of SaaS products, etc. It's inviting more non-experts into the world, and that goes for all of the other areas of the geospatial world. So once experts only, still experts are dominant, but we're seeing this move towards non-experts, and that's again a critical part of this Geospatial-Next conversation. Separated disciplines. We sort of operated in our own worlds, somewhat degree sort of isolated. GIS sits in the GIS department. Remote sensing can sit in other places. So we've sort of sat in these different worlds, and I'm just pointing at two: remote sensing and GIS. There's other fields. There's the 3D. There's sort of the architectural three-dimensional world, which we've not spoken about. But these all live in separate worlds used by sort of different users. We're now seeing a world of convergence. So we're beginning to see this all come together as we collect all this data, and as we have tools to actually process and analyze that data to get insights and ultimately take action. We're beginning to see all this stuff come together. Again, huge part of the Geospatial-Next conversation. I've been critical of the GIS industry because I've always seen it being map centric, and as a geographer, I could never really understand when I first started working with GIS why I'd suddenly become a map maker, because maps weren't really that relevant to me as a geographer. It was more about understanding the place. Again, that geospatial label. Why is Big Cottonwood, a Little Cottonwood Canyon that shape? It's a U-shaped valley, glaciation, obviously. Why did the Mormons come into Salt Lake City? There's a human geography question. That was always the why of things for me, and maps were just a part of that story. But when I started working in the GIS field, it was all about maps. I think that where we're moving to, and where the GIS industry and all the geospatial world is moving towards, is this kind of business outcome driven world. So the BI, we're looking at the business intelligence world and understanding, well, there are tools there for visualization and analytics that allow business people to make business decisions. Maps don't necessarily drive towards business decisions, so we have to kind of change our emphasis, and that'll be a big part of this conversation as we move forward, as I look to the future of these talks. Departmental lock-in, quite often you'll find that geospatial technology and data sits in particular departments in organizations. We're now talking about enterprise, so we're talking about spreading this data, this insight, this decision-making technology and data wider across the whole organization. I kind of mentioned isolated as well. Again, department lock-in, separate disciplines, that's been our history. We're now talking about integration as well. So how do we play nicely with other technologies? And I've mentioned in previous talks, we can play nicely with business systems like SAP, etc. So we're now beginning to integrate with these other systems and really provide that additional value to those systems that a location-based perspective can give. It's interesting to look at the industry, actually, historically the geospatial industry. There's a lot of service companies out there, a lot of organizations that are partnered with some of the big boys in the industry, and they provide services. There's a move towards products now. So I've been fortunate enough to work within both service companies and product companies as well. So I've seen things from both perspectives. Some are purely product companies, and there's these whole world of startups, the geospatial, that are providing different very focused products. And there's also, the services piece. The world I think we're moving towards is a hybrid world where service companies are beginning to look at products and beginning to see that there's a benefit to building products. That's a massive journey for those organizations because they're not product companies. So we're beginning to see that move towards a hybrid model, which is fascinating. And again, we'll probably cover some of that in these talks. And then, I've mentioned that in an early slide, but I think overall the industry, and again, I'll point at GIS, has been very 2D focused, and people still think in 2 dimensions, and that's been sort of the history of the industry. It's maps, it's 2-dimensional maps. They became interactive when they went on the web, and then we've got, the mobile stuff. But I think we're moving now towards a world which is multi-dimensional. I've mentioned this before in other talks, and kind of I actually stepped away from the pure GIS world and kind of went into the multi-dimensional world, and have done again actually in my career. So I've seen it from the pure GIS 2D world and perspective, and also from the multi-dimensional world. And I'll talk more about sort of those data stories and how much value multi-dimensional data can bring to actually making business decisions. And that's 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, digital twin, and then it's 4 dimensions, which is this whole idea of change. So we'll cover some of that stuff. So I mentioned the fact that there's opportunities abound, but I think there's in a lot of cases it's kind of back to business 101s as we look and as the industry grows and established companies are looking to either add products to their mix or start adopting some of these new ways of doing things, being more business centric, getting into other verticals. It's sort of back to basics. Some of the things that I see and have observed about strategy. I mean, people can overstate strategy, but most of my career I've seen planning and not strategy. Strategy is a different beast. So I mean, business 101 is build a proper strategy, understand what a strategy is, and execute against that strategy. That's where you get tactical, etc. So we may touch on some of that stuff. I don't know. We may do, but again, I've seen that. I look at our world as changing and how we need to change and take advantage of the advances that we're beginning to see. But I'm also going to include this startup 101. I mean, I've read lots about sort of lean startup and that kind of innovative approach. Innovation isn't just technology; it's also business innovation. How do you change your business model, for example? So we may touch on that stuff, but I think that's the world we're entering, where it's back to basics on the business side of it, building proper strategies, and then taking that sort of startup mentality where you fail quickly, you build frameworks which help you execute successfully, you measure those things, all of that stuff. Not shooting from the hip. Again, I've seen a little bit too much of that in my career. I think now's the time, if you're going to be successful, to start sort of thinking about these 101 ideas. So what next for this Geospatial-Next journey? Let's map some things out. I think I've spoken a lot about the world that's changing, and we've touched on some of those sort of theoretical things. What I'd like to move towards is more focus on business outcomes and the decision-making process. So really, instead of looking from the bottom up, from data to technology to from there, actually looking down to actually look at some of those decisions and business challenges that we can solve leveraging geospatial. And I'll choose particular industries that I'm working in now to help illustrate that, and tools that I'm working with now. I mentioned multidimensional stories, and I harp on this one, but again, it struck me a number of years ago how 2-dimensional information presented can be very helpful in seeing patterns and bringing lots of data together, but it doesn't give you a sense of place. It doesn't give you a sense of what that asset is and what it looks like. So 3-dimensional data gives you that perspective of if you're standing there looking at something. 3 dimensions can actually give you all sorts of additional data about whether a tree is too tall and if it falls it will hit a power line. Those kind of things we can get from 3D. We can't really get that from 2D. So they both provide lots of value, but often we have to construct stories which leverage both those data types and analytics behind both those data types. 4D is the sort of world of IoT, is that world of change, which again gives us another dimension on what we're talking about. So data, these multidimensional data that's available to us now, and the processing and analytics that can be part of that, allows us to tell data stories to then help business folks solve problems and actually make decisions and take action on things. So again, that's going to be another part of of what we'll cover. More interviews. It tends to be me talking too much. I've got now connection to a whole host of experts that I need to pull into these conversations and get their opinions, not only on the technology, but also on how we apply the technology. So really, I'm most interested in we can talk LiDAR, we could talk hyperspectral sensors until the cows come home, which we probably will do, but how do you leverage that to actually solve business problems? So we'll really keep focus on the business side of things, but provide some of that technical background to help me understand, and hopefully you understand as well, because some of these areas are new to us, depending where you've come from. And of course, more mullings and musings from myself, which people often comment on and give me feedback on. So you'll get plenty of that as well. So we're starting that. We're restarting the engine on Geospatial-Next. We're kind of taking it from a slightly different perspective. But hopefully, more interviews and more feedback from you guys. I always love when people give me feedback, and you do a lot. So I look forward to that. So we're back.
Thanks for joining us on the Geospatial-Next channel. We're focused here on understanding the future of geospatial. That's both how we get to mainstream adoption of the technology and data, and how we start using blockchain and crypto to move things forward. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.